a side view of the riot at U6. It took a lot of pressure to bend the legs like this. Power supply rehab was straightforward. I replaced the 47 microfarad cap, CR7, R10, the trim pot, and all the headers on the board. Added a ground stud that all of the ground mods can be connected to. And here you see that all of the voltages are correct using my custom multi-voltage DMM. Here's a close-up of the ground stud I added. I like this technique. I simply reversed one of the screws that came out of the hole where the 2N6057 is secured. The driver board tested 100%. I always use my RoboWars to test driver boards since RoboWars uses all the circuitry on the driver board. I also added a ground stud in the upper right-hand corner. It's a 1-pin Molex connector. A Gottlieb touchdown MPU that I am testing inside of my Gottlieb Spider-Man game. And this MPU just wasn't booting, and the root cause of it not booting was U6 had failed, and I determined that using my Great Plains Electronics Quick Scan 80. I removed the old one, put a nice 40-pin socket in there, and then replaced it with some of my new old stock. Along the way, I put a socket in for the 5101. It's an AMI chip, so those are always suspect, but I put the socket in so that the client could add NVRAM easily if he'd like to in the future. I scraped all the reset parts. There was no alkaline to abate here, no corrosion from the batteries, but I still scraped the reset section and simplified it down to the single DS1811 reset chip. It's gold on the top, and I installed a 1.5 farad super cap to retain the 5101 memory. Added the ground mod, which is this loop of wire that my hang tag is attached to, put the right label over the game ROM, and added a single point ground stud, and I'll provide the wiring for that also. But she's good to go. Let's boot it up. I love ADA because it boots up immediately. No 5-second delay. Since it's in my Spider-Man, the lamps are going to look funny because it expects to be in a touchdown. But you can see that all of the lamps, let me get this stuff out of the way, are functioning properly. Well, they're blinking on and off. I have LEDs in some of these. And Gottlieb, for whatever reason, never blinked the extra ball light. Let's put it into test. I've got my scratch-built switch matrix tester. I'm going to skip it all the way to test 16. Get myself off of the flipper button. This is the familiar. It'll click the 3 relays, and then it'll start cycling through the lamps. Looks a little different on an 80 game since it's an 80A MPU, but it's turning lamps on and off, so we know those are working correctly. It's going to skip solenoids 3 and 4 since those are coin counter solenoids, and 7 also. But everything else is driving like it should. Switch test. Testing the rows and the columns simultaneously by going across the diagonal. I usually skip 77 because that does something on some games, and other games it doesn't. Apparently it works on this one. Display test. This is something I wish Gottlieb had done differently. I don't think there's any way to speed this up. So you have to watch all the way from 0 to 4. The one's digit on Gottlieb games is driven completely differently from everything else. So you have to watch the ones specifically. But once you get through 0 through 4, then you guarantee that all segments are being driven correctly. You'll note that in my Spider-Man player 1 position is a 7-digit display, and I'm in the process of converting the game over to 7 digits. Of course, I started that process many years ago with Steve Charlin, and I figured out how to do it. And when I did it, I just added an adapter board. I'm probably going to take that off and just wire it directly. The trick is finding the 21-pin connectors you need to do that. Test 20 just verifies the game ROM and memory are working correctly. So this MPU board is good to go. And I thank you so much for sending it. The sounds only board with piggyback from the Gottlieb touchdown game. And when I plugged it in, it wasn't making any sounds at all. I replaced these two 47 microfarad caps for good measure. They're 30 years old. I will replace this one also. The root cause of the problem on this board was the 6503 that's underneath the daughter card had failed. So I desoldered it from the backside, and fortunately it came out. I did not want to desolder the daughter card because that would just add to the problems. And I put a socket in, and well, I had to put the chip in the socket and then slide it all in there and then solder it from the backside. So even though I put a socket in there, it's really not that useful, except that it'll prevent desoldering a chip again. But if somebody needs to get that out of there next time, they're gonna have to take this daughter card off. So anyway, let's fire it up and start a game. Again, I'm in my Spider-Man. But it is making touchdown sounds. And we can play a little Spider-Man one-handed or so. And hear some more sounds. Never fear, if you got your hand on the right flipper, the left flipper will be necessary. Well, that was a short game. I think that's enough to give you an idea that this sound card is completely operational now. And so I've repaired the power supply, the MPU, which had a failed U6, and also the sound card. Now the driver board on this thing was working perfectly. Thank you so much for sending these.